There are voices that you hear once and never forget. Voices that not only fill a room, but literally shake it. Whitney Houston possessed such a voice. With a single song, she brought tens of thousands to tears. A recording in which she sang the American national anthem gave people all over the world goosebumps, even those who didn't understand a single word of English. They felt it anyway. They just had to feel it. But behind this voice, behind this radiance, was a story that the world had never seen. A life that began in triumph and ended in a tragedy that resonates to this day. Because Whitney Houston's story didn't begin on a big stage. It began in an empty swimming pool in the backyard of a house in New Jersey. The pool had no water. It stood there empty and still, like a forgotten promise. But for little Whitney, it was something else entirely. It was her stage, her church, her personal recording studio. She climbed in, stood in the middle, and sang. No one listened. No one applauded. But she didn't care. The acoustics of the concrete enveloped her voice like a second skin, and she sang as if there were no tomorrow, until the day her mother listened. Cissy Houston was no ordinary woman. She had already released 4 albums, was a respected gospel singer, and knew the music world inside and out. When she heard her daughter singing in that empty pool, she immediately recognized what she had in front of her. No maternal instinct, no self-deception, but the sober assessment of a professional musician. Cissy grabbed Whitney's hand and took her straight to the church in the community. What happened next changed everything. In front of the church's choir director, Cissy Houston made a demand that sounded almost audacious in its directness. Her daughter should take over the solo part in the choir. The child was a primary school student, no training, no stage experience. The choir director was initially speechless, but then he remembered who the woman in front of him was, Cissy Houston. He let Whitney sing, and within moments, all doubt had vanished. The girl had a talent that could not be denied. Whitney Houston grew up with the sound of the church in her ears and her mother's ambition in her back. In the community choir, she sang her way further from week to week, took over the solo parts, and learned what it means to move a crowd with a single note. The church was her first concert hall, and the audience there was mercilessly honest. Anyone who didn't deliver would feel it. Whitney always delivered. At 19, she got her first really big chance. A well-known talk show invited Cissy Houston and her daughter. The rumor had spread that the singer's daughter was exceptionally talented. Whitney entered the studio. The cameras were running. The audience was waiting. She was supposed to perform a demanding musical piece, one that posed challenges even for experienced singers. What no one suspected at this point was that the live band would mess everything up that evening. As soon as Whitney started singing, she noticed that something was wrong. The band was playing much slower than the original, a different tempo, a different pulse. Her breath got out of rhythm. The laboriously rehearsed phrases began to slip. Standing on stage and realizing that the ground is slipping away beneath you, that's one of the worst moments a singer can experience. Cissy Houston was sitting in the audience and recognized the situation in fractions of a second. She stood up, went backstage, stood in front of the band, and started beating time. The musicians hesitated, looked at each other, but continued playing. Slowly they adapted to the new tempo. Whitney felt the change, found her rhythm again, and completed the performance as she had rehearsed it. Powerful, flawless, unforgettable. When the last note had faded away, the presenter grabbed the microphone and said to the audience, "You will never forget this name, Whitney Houston." He was right. After her appearance on the talk show, Whitney Houston signed a record deal and began recording her debut album. But the work dragged on. 2 years passed and the record company didn't seem to be in a hurry. Whitney became impatient. The music scene was in motion, new artists were pushing forward, and she was standing on the sidelines waiting. Behind the scenes, the story looked quite different. The record company believed in her unconditionally, and that's why they took their time. The label invested an unusually large amount of money and care into the production because they didn't want a fleeting debut that would be forgotten after one season. When Whitney expressed her concern, the people in charge said, "The others will come and go. Your music will make history." It wasn't empty comfort, it was a prophecy. The album finally came out, with a name that could hardly be surpassed in terms of self-confidence. Simply Whitney Houston. No edition, no subtitle, no advertising slogan. Just a name. And that was enough. In the first few weeks after its release, the album barely moved in the charts. The record company was bleeding money, and expectations didn't seem to be met. To minimize losses, they sent Whitney on tour through nightclubs, an endless cycle of small stages, poor lighting, and unknown audiences. It wasn't a glamorous path, but it was the right one, because something strange happened in these clubs. When Whitney began to sing, people stopped talking to each other. Glasses were put down. Conversations fell silent. Eyes turned to the stage. Anyone who was done with her asked the same question. Who was that? The rumor spread like wildfire. Week after week, the album climbed the charts. Then after 14 months, it reached number one. A total of 22 million copies were sold. The best-selling debut album in the history of pop music. The success of the first album was followed by the second, this time named even more confidently, simply Whitney. No last name, no family name, as if a single word was enough to say everything. And that one word was indeed enough. The album immediately shot to number one on the Billboard charts, the first woman ever to achieve this feat. This album also sold over 20 million copies. But what happened next changed everything. At an award ceremony aimed at black musicians, Whitney Houston was nominated for an award. When her name was called, there was no applause in the hall. But boos. Whitney froze. She tried to rummage through her memory, but she couldn't find an explanation. What had she done? The truth, when it finally came to light, was much darker than expected. Part of the black music community accused her of wanting to sound too white. The second album contained pop songs and dance tracks that were more in line with the white mainstream than the R&B, soul, and hip-hop that many considered the cultural heritage of the black community. In the eyes of these critics, Whitney Houston had sold her identity to reach a broader, white audience. Some even dug into her family history. One great-grandfather was partly of Dutch descent. Another paternal ancestor had Native American roots. Whitney, it was said, was not a real black woman. For someone who had spent her entire life as part of the black community, that was a blow straight to the heart. She had never doubted her identity, and suddenly someone was doubting for her. This wasn't a career problem. It was a human problem, a deep, lasting rift. At the next award event, the boos were repeated. Whitney sat in the front row, trying to keep her face under control. She didn't quite succeed. Tears filled her eyes silently and betrayingly. Her longtime saxophonist said years later in an interview, "What she went through during that time was much worse than most people will ever understand. She never fully healed those wounds. That was the beginning of the end." Outwardly, it looked like success. Something broke underneath. Whitney responded to the criticism with her third album, which more strongly reflected black musical traditions. But the calculation didn't work out. Sales fell by more than half compared to its predecessor. And then, as if that wasn't enough, a new competitor entered the stage. Mariah Carey. Brilliant, technically flawless, seemingly effortlessly at the top. She debuted and pushed Whitney Houston from number one, surpassed her in sales, and also wrote all her songs herself, which earned her the reputation of a genius talent. The press took to the rivalry with relish. In every interview, Whitney was asked what she thought of Mariah Carey. The question became routine. Whitney became more sensitive. The tension between the two, although not openly expressed, was real, and the media fueled it with pleasure. And then a man appeared in Whitney's life who would change everything. Kevin Costner, then one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He had won 7 Oscars for Dances with Wolves and grossed 7 times his budget with Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He had earned his place in Hollywood, and now he came to Whitney with an offer. He wanted her as the female lead in his next film. The main character was a world star, and who could embody that more credibly than Whitney Houston herself? Whitney refused. Costner wouldn't let up. For a year, he tried to convince her. He even delayed production until she agreed. Eventually, she did. The film was called Bodyguard, the story of a world-famous singer and the man who protects her. The film became a global phenomenon, but the soundtrack, Whitney's soundtrack, surpassed everything. It sold 45 million copies and became the best-selling film album in history, listed in the Guinness Book of Records. That's the part most people never find out. The album's most famous song was originally a country song. Whitney had reinterpreted it in her own style, and Kevin Costner had insisted on recording the introduction without musical accompaniment. He wanted Whitney's voice to stand alone, naked and unprotected. The others in the studio doubted it, but when Whitney began to sing, there was absolute silence in the room. No one dared to move, no one breathed too loudly, and the rest is history. The success of the film awakened new ambitions in Whitney. She wanted more acting roles. She took on more leading roles, but she didn't let go of her singing career either. The result was a relentless schedule. Tours around the world, live performances night after night, without a break, without regard for limits. Her voice began to suffer. The powerful high notes she was known for became more fragile. She had to transpose songs, singing lower than intended. Nevertheless, the concerts sometimes fell far short of expectations, and the audience voiced their displeasure. Behind the scenes, the story looked very different. Whitney tried to save the situation by practicing even more. But excessive training on an already damaged voice is like running on a broken leg. The damage got worse, and the reason wasn't just the exhausting work. At the center of the problem was her husband. In the year Bodyguard was released in theaters, Whitney Houston married Bobby Brown. He was a sought-after dancer and singer. Michael Jackson is said to have personally taken lessons from him. Whitney and Bobby knew each other from the industry, got closer, and started a relationship. Whitney had never wanted to get married. In interviews, she had made it clear. She distrusted men. She wanted to lead an independent life. She didn't need marriage. Bobby Brown proposed to her. She refused. He asked again. She refused again. Then Whitney became pregnant, and when he asked one more time, she said yes. But what happened next changed everything. Whitney returned from her honeymoon with an injury. There was a cut-like wound over 7 centimeters long on her face. A close friend asked what had happened. Whitney replied that there had been an argument. A glass had broken. She had been injured. The friend swallowed. On a honeymoon, a physical altercation. Already. The press eyed the marriage suspiciously. Whitney had the image of a flawless princess, modestly dressed, calm in her expression, a kind of counter-design to the provocative stagings of her colleagues. Bobby Brown was the exact opposite, loud, unpredictable, notorious for his escapades. In joint interviews, Whitney often had to take control, laugh nervously, trying to give dignity to his slip-ups. Observers said the two seemed less like a married couple than like mother and child. In the black community, on the other hand, the marriage was cheered. The woman who sounded too white had now married the ultra-authentic Bobby Brown. Finally, she was one of them again. A mutual child was born. Life seemed to normalize. And then, without any warning, everything fell apart. At an airport in Hawaii, marijuana was found in the couple's bags during a baggage check. Not just in Bobby's bag, also in Whitney's. For someone whose image had been built on purity and discipline for years, this was a public disaster. Fans defended her. She had only transported the stuff for her husband. But the doubts remained, and soon the evidence followed. At Michael Jackson's 30th stage anniversary, Whitney appeared as a surprise guest. The audience hardly recognized her. She was skeletal thin, her eyes were empty and glassy. Something was wrong. In response to press inquiries, her spokesperson explained that family problems had robbed her of her appetite. But it was more than that. It was much more. The truth, when it finally came to light, was much darker than expected. Bobby Brown was arrested several times for drunk driving during this time. Traces of hallucinogenic substances were found in a urine sample. He spent time in jail. The pressure that all of this put on Whitney was enormous. The crumbling career, the unstable husband, the daily exhaustion. In this state, she resorted to what she had become accustomed to as a teenager. The first encounter with illegal drugs had not started with herself. It was her older brother who had given her the substance for the first time, as a birthday present. Years later, when this fact became public, the brother said, "Everyone did it that way back then. I didn't know it was wrong." As if to dismiss the poisoning of a sister as a cultural misunderstanding, the public reacted with horror. Whitney, who had first come into contact with drugs as a child through her brother, had left this past behind her for years. But when life got harder, when her career stalled and her marriage proved toxic, the old demon returned. This time he stayed. Her body changed daily. The voice, once divine, fragile. The performances, once flawless, disappointing. One evening at the concert, fans openly insulted her. She trained harder, spared herself less. But the training did more harm than good. At home, the situation escalated. In the presence of their daughter, Bobby Brown spat at his wife. He punched her in the face, so hard that she had to go to the hospital. Whitney called the police. When Bobby found out, he fled and showed up 3 days later to turn himself in. Whitney dropped the charges. He was the father of her child. But the news had spread. It was in the newspapers. That could no longer be hidden. That's the part most people never find out. After 14 years of marriage, Whitney Houston filed for divorce. She tried a new beginning, a new album, long after her last release. But sales were far below 10% of what she had once achieved. The world had changed. And Whitney, too. What was once a matter of course, that voice, that presence, had now become arduous. She waited for the next chance. But that chance never came. One evening in February 2012, the day before the Grammy Awards, Whitney Houston sent her assistant out to run small errands. She said she wanted to take a quick shower. The assistant left the hotel room. When she came back, too much time had passed. The bathroom door was locked. No answer to her knocking and calling. She opened the door. Whitney was in the bathtub. The water had covered her. Next to her, on the edge, a white powder could be seen. The paramedics arrived too late. The autopsy revealed that various substances had been detected in her blood. None of them in lethal doses. That was the cruelest part. She hadn't planned to die. She had taken the drugs and then got into the hot tub. The heart, overwhelmed, had failed for a moment. She had passed out in the tub and didn't wake up. The death hit the world like a blow. The next evening, at the Grammy Awards, the awards ceremony turned into a silent memorial service. Colleagues sang her songs. People paused. The industry that had made her great wept. Her funeral took place in that small community church where it had all begun, where a girl with an empty stage and a full voice had first appeared as a soloist. Kevin Costner gave the eulogy. 3 years after Whitney's death, her only daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was found unconscious in a bathtub. The same kind of condition, the same kind of substances. She was taken to the hospital, did not recover, and died a few months later. Shortly before her death, Bobby Christina had written in a social network, "Mom, I miss you so much. With every second that passes, I love you more." Fate had repeated itself, with a cruelty that defied explanation. Mother and daughter both plunged into the same kind of darkness, both gone in the same way. Whitney Houston had a voice that moved millions, and a life accompanied by wounds the world never saw. Her brilliance was real, so was her pain, and in the end, neither could save the other.